So, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on the VAT Domestic Reverse Charge. My name is Tim Fulker. I'm an Associate Director here at Seymour Taylor, and I head our property and construction sectors team, who advise builders, developers, subcontractors, investors, and property professionals on all the accounting and tax aspects of the sector, including, of course, VAT. In today's webinar, we aim to tell you about what is changing, provide some background to the changes, and highlight the practical issues that businesses that are affected by the changes need to address. If you have any questions as we go through, then please put them in the Q&A box, and my colleague Suzanne Curry will monitor those, and we will do our best to cover those at the end of the webinar. We will be making a recording of the webinar, and as well as being sent out to all of the attendees, it will be available on our website in a couple of days' time. So, a quick introduction to the domestic reverse charge. This was first discussed and proposed by HM Revenue and Customs. Well, it was well back in the autumn of 2019. And since then, it has been delayed twice, once because of representations made by the construction industry, and then again in the autumn of 2020 because of the impact of COVID. But now it's going to be introduced for the construction sector with effect from the 1st of March this year. And this will fundamentally alter the way businesses within the construction industry scheme record, report, and pay VAT. So, who is affected? The reverse charge will affect both contractors and subcontractors who supply and receive certain kinds of construction services in the UK. And those are essentially the ones which fall within the scope of the CIS scheme, construction industry scheme. And throughout in many parts of the legislation, they are sometimes referred to as specified services. These new rules are mandatory. You cannot opt in or opt out, or only apply it to certain invoices. It's probably useful to explain the reason why for this change. And it's essentially one of an anti-avoidance. It's a scheme that's been introduced to cover anti-avoidance. The legislation has been in place for a number of years now, over 20 years, but it's now being extended to the construction sector. Section 55A of the VAT Act 1994, customers to account for tax on supplies of goods or services of a kind used in missing trader fraud, provides that where a taxable person makes a supply of goods or services to which that section applies, and the supply is not an accepted one, then it is for the recipient, if they are a VAT registered person, to account for and pay the VAT on the supply on the supplier's behalf. From the 1st of March 2021, these regulations apply to construction services, together with any goods supplied with those services, which fall to be treated as part of one single supply of services. And we'll come on to cover that later. In simple terms, under the new system, VAT is only charged on supplies of specified construction services throughout a contract when they are made to a consumer or an end user. VAT is not charged on supplies between VAT registered subcontractors and contractors in the supply chain for that supply. So, what is changing? Under the new rules, VAT registered businesses who provide a construction service and any related goods to a VAT registered customer who is not an end user no longer need to account for the VAT. No VAT is charged to the customer and no VAT needs to be declared and paid over to HM Revenue and Customs. Instead, it is the customer who will account for the VAT as output tax, as if they made the supply to themselves. In turn, the customer can recover the VAT subject to the normal rules for VAT recovery. So, how will that appear on your VAT return? So if you're a supplier making such a sale under the reverse charge scheme, you must not enter any output tax on sales made under the reverse charge. All you need to do is enter the net value of the sale in box 6 of your VAT return, just as you would always have done. If you are purchasing those services, those that are subject to the reverse charge, you must enter the VAT due on the reverse charge as output tax on your VAT return in box 1. But make sure that you do not enter the net value of the purchase of that purchase as a net sale in box 6. You may reclaim the input tax on your reverse charge purchases subject to the normal VAT rules. For most businesses, the output VAT and the input VAT will be the same figure. But if you are partially exempt for VAT purposes, then the input tax you can reclaim may be restricted. But that's just in the same way as it had always been. So let's have a look at what you need to do on raising an invoice covered by the reverse charge. The one thing that you don't do is include the VAT amount in the total you charge to your customer. When supplying a service subject to the domestic reverse charge, suppliers must show all the information required on a normal VAT invoice, but make a note on the invoice to make it clear that the domestic reverse charge applies and that it is the customer's responsibility to account for the VAT. You need to clearly state how much VAT is due under reverse charge or the rate of VAT if the VAT amount cannot be shown. The VAT should not be included in the amount charged to the customer. So, earlier on, we mentioned that the only time that you do charge VAT to somebody is when they are an end user. And this is a concept that the reverse charge legislation has introduced. And it is important that you identify who is an end user and an associated term called an intermediary supplier business. For reverse charge purposes, consumers and final customers are called end users. They are businesses or groups of businesses that are VAT and construction industry scheme registered, but do not make onward supplies of the building and construction services supplied to them. The reverse charge does not apply to services to end users where the end user tells their supplier or building contractor in writing if they are an end user. And intermediary suppliers are VAT and construction industry scheme registered businesses that are connected or linked to an end user. If such an intermediary supplier buys construction services and resupplies them to a connected or linked end user without making any material alterations to the supplies, then they are also treated as an end user and the reverse charge does not apply. And on the next slide, we've got a little example of what we mean by an intermediary supplier. So, for example, you may be dealing with a large property owning group with several companies within that organization. The group may buy construction services through one company within the group, who then recharges those services to either other group companies, their tenants, or indeed both. All of the members of that all of the member companies of that property owning group and their tenants will be end users in this situation, and the reverse charge should not apply. So we've identified now why end user or intermediary status is important. So how do you identify and get confirmation that somebody is indeed an end user? The regulations require end users and intermediary suppliers to notify their subcontractors of their end user or intermediary supplier status in writing. For those of you who have been following the proposed introduction of the reverse charge since it was first mooted in the summer of 2019, this is a late amendment to the legislation, and it is designed to make sure all parties are clear whether the supply is excluded from the reverse charge, and hopefully bring certainty for contractors as to the correct treatment for their supplies. If the advice is followed, it will remove a concern that HM Revenue and Customs may seek to challenge the reverse charge treatment where a business that qualified as an end user or intermediary supplier had not given a proper notification of their status. And it's worth pointing out that it is the responsibility of the end user to, the onus is on the end user to confirm their status. So notification of an end user or intermediary status can be made in a number of ways, provided it is writing. It can be on paper and sent by post. It can be electronically in an email, or it can be in a contract. The notification should be kept as normal business records and show clearly what supplies are covered. The notification, and in fact, if you're dealing with a potential customer on several contracts at any one time, this should be assessed on a contract by contract basis. So, what's the type of wording that you should be looking to get? Where the end user or intermediary supplier notification is in a contract issued by the supplier, this will be a valid notification as long as the customer has given written agreement to the contract. And here is an example of the wording to use. And we'll just pause a little bit here to allow you to make a note of the wording if you want to. We are an end user for the purposes of Section 55A of the VAT Act, reverse charge for building and construction services. Please issue us with a normal VAT invoice with VAT charged at the appropriate rate. We will not account for the reverse charge. If a customer has not given written confirmation of their end user or intermediary supplier status, the supplier must assume that the reverse charge applies and will not charge VAT to the customer. If a written notification is not made correctly, it's the customer who will be liable for accounting for the VAT that should have been charged under the reverse charge. It's important that the person making the notification knows and understands that it is correct. Now, many businesses will of course be dealing with, many of your customers may well indeed be domestic consumers, domestic householders, for example. Where sales are clearly for domestic consumer sales, it isn't necessary to check the VAT, CIS or end user status of the customer, and the normal VAT rules will apply. However, if there is any doubt, although the onus is on the end user to confirm their status, if there is any doubt, you should always ask your customer whether they are registered for VAT and CIS, or whether or not they are an end user. So we've covered kind of what changes in terms of the VAT legislation, but what types of services are actually those affected by the changes? As of course, services within the construction sector cover a wide breadth of activities. The new rules affect a long list of supplies made in the construction industry, and they can be found on the gov.uk website, as well as any construction materials used directly while providing those services. The legislation provides details of the services which the domestic charge applies to, which are often referred to as specified services, and those services which it does not. We'll call them excluded services. Essentially, specified construction services are those which are subject to reporting under the construction industry scheme, CIS, and the details are set out in HMRC Guide 340. And most people operating within the construction sector should be familiar with those services. Although we've said that that we split services between specified services, which are subject to reverse charge, and excluded services, which are not covered by the reverse charge, there are situations where excluded services will be treated as specified services. And that's to the extent that they form part of one single supply that includes both specified construction service, that includes specified construction services. If you provide a single supply containing both specified and excluded services, the reverse charge rules will apply to the whole supply. But this is subject to another final amendment that was made in the legislation, and that's in respect of what are referred to as disregarded services. if the reverse charge part of your supply of one large supply is 5% or less of the value of the whole supply, this can be disregarded and normal VAT rules will apply to the whole supply, provided, of course, the customer has made the appropriate end user notification. And therefore, it is very important to check through the list of supplies to understand which supplies you are making and whether or not, and also consider whether or not you've got one single supply or not. So, which services are covered by the VAT reverse charge? As I said, more information on more details of this can be found in HMRC Guide 340. But to summarise, specified construction services are the construction, alteration, repair, extension, demolition, or dismantling of buildings or structures. The construction, alteration, repair, extension, or demolition of any works forming or to form part of the land, including walls, roadworks, pipelines, reservoirs, water mains, wells, and sewers. The installation in any building or structure of systems of heating, lighting, air conditioning, ventilation, power supply, drainage, sanitation, or water supplies. The internal cleaning of buildings and structures so far as carried out in the course of their construction, alteration, repair, or extension. The painting or decorating the internal or external surfaces of any building or structure, and any services which form an integral part of or are preparatory to any of those earlier services, including site clearance, earth moving, excavation, tunneling, the laying of foundations, erecting scaffolding, site restoration, and landscaping. And of course, on the other side of that, which services are not liable in the first instance to the reverse charge. The manufacture of building or engineering components or equipment, materials, plant or machinery, or delivering any of those to a site. The manufacturing of components for heating, lighting, air conditioning, or ventilation systems, and similarly drainage, sanitation, or water supply, or delivering any of those to a site. The professional work of architects or surveyors, or any other consultants involved in a project. Sign writing and erecting, installing signage boards and advertisements, the installation of seating, blinds and shutters, and the installation of security systems, including burglar alarms, CCTV, and PA systems. However, as a reminder, these excluded services would be subject to the reverse charge to the extent that they form part of a single supply that includes specified construction services. So, when do the reverse charge rules apply? If you sell building and construction services, then the reverse charge will need to be used when your customer is registered for VAT in the UK. The payment for the supply is reported within the construction industry scheme. Your customer has not given written confirmation that they are an end user or intermediary supplier. You are not an employment business supplying either staff or workers or both. and the services you supply are standard or reduced rated for VAT. And just to touch on that final point, of course, the rules do not apply in respect of zero rated supplies. But then, of course, the logic for that is that, of course, there is no VAT on zero rated supplies. And at the beginning, as I highlighted, this is designed as an anti-avoidance measure where people have been to stop people collecting and not remitting VAT to HM Revenue and Customs. So for zero rated supplies, there is no VAT that could be misappropriated. If you buy building and construction services, the reverse charge will need to be used when the payment for the supply is reported through the construction industry scheme. The supply is standard or reduced rated. You are not hiring either staff or workers or both. And you're not using the end user or intermediary exclusions. If these rules affect you, then now is the time to act. So, practical points for you to consider. You will need to make changes to your invoicing and accounting procedures to take the reverse charge into account. But this will differ depending on whether you are a contractor or a subcontractor, or potentially both. Cloud versions of most of the major accounting software that's on the market, such as Sage, Xero, and QuickBooks, should all be fully functional and allow you to cope with the reverse charge. But if you are using a desktop version, then you need to check that it has been properly upgraded to the correct version. You should also consider the cash flow implications on your business of moving to the new regime, as there may be ways to mitigate the impact. On supplies that are subject to the reverse charge, VAT will no longer be charged. Businesses that have relied on the VAT element that they receive from their customers to help them with cash flow will need to consider the impact of this. The reverse charge will apply to all jobs completed on or after the 1st of March 2021, but it may also apply to work that was commenced before this date but completed afterwards. This will depend upon the tax point, the specific VAT tax point of the supply. Determining when the switch to the new VAT regime takes place depends on the tax point, i.e. the date of the issue of the VAT invoice or the receipt of payment. Where the tax point is on or after 1st of March 2021, then the reverse charge should be applied, even for work commenced before this date. Otherwise, the existing VAT rules apply. So that covers the main body of the webinar, and hopefully that has given you a flavour and a better appreciation of the impact of the changes from the reverse charge. At Seymour Taylor, we've got a considerable amount of experience and expertise in the construction sector. As I said, working with individuals and companies of various sizes, including investors and developers. And we've been assisting them with all of their tax and accounting requirements. As well as VAT, we can assist them. We're able to assist those businesses with accounting support, the requirements of the CIS scheme and employment status matters, maximising capital allowance claims, research and development claims, tax efficient property ownership, and stamp duty land tax planning and advice. And to summarise, the rules surrounding the VAT reverse charge are quite complex, and it is important that you are compliant from day one. HM Revenue and Customs have said that they will be adopting what could be described as a light touch approach for the first few months of the introduction of the scheme, and they will not be looking to penalise businesses who have made honest mistakes in introducing the new rules, but they will be focusing their attention on those businesses who have not been complying with the rules on a more deliberate basis. However, it is important that you get things right from day one, because the sooner that you have things ready, the sooner you can have your systems up and running in the right way. And it's highly recommended that you seek professional advice, and which is why we are standing by to help you. And my email address is on the screen, and I will leave that up there for the time being. And I'm now going to ask my colleague Suzanne to see if we have received any questions during the course of the presentation. I think we might have had a couple.
We have, Tim. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can, Suzanne.
We have had questions from the same person. So the company supplies air conditioning units to its customer base, which are 99% end users. We purchase units from Fujitsu, Daikin, etc., and buy the materials needed for installation of those products in the customer's premises, i.e. pipework, insulation, cable, sundry fixings, etc. We also provide ongoing maintain service for these systems and purchase any necessary parts or consumables that may be required. They've said they apply the current rate of 20%. The only exception is for domestic non-business users in private homes, which is 5%. And how does this affect their business? And they've said they do not carry out any work under the CIS scheme. So how does this affect our business, if at all?
So probably for them, if they are purely supplying the equipment, then they would not be, those services that would not be covered by the reverse charge. It is the installation side. It is the installation side of the service is where you would need to consider. So this is where the potential problem, or the potential confusing element, where you may have sort of effectively have a mixed supply, some specified services and some excluded services that's where when you're looking at ones where you've got both. So both a supply and install, where your supply covers both, supply and install of equipment, you have potentially got two parts to the service. But
Okay.
I think from what you're saying, if it is only the supply of the goods, then that would fall outside the scope. And this is probably where we came back to where we were talking about earlier on. I mentioned that there was a 5% disregard on the reverse charge. So if the reverse charge, so in a typical situation, you might have installation. So you might have production of some equipment, and then the installation of that equipment. And in that case, the installation might be a relatively small part of the overall value of the supply. And if the reverse charge element of a supply is less than 5% of the whole value of the supply, then it can be disregarded, and the normal VAT rules apply to the whole contract.
Okay, and obviously if the individual wants to talk to you further, they can email you. They've got your email address on the screen.
Yeah, absolutely. If anybody has a follow-up question, then if you're an existing Seymour Taylor contact client, then please, you can either contact your usual manager or director here at Seymour Taylor, or you can email me, and my contact details are on the screen.
And is it worth just going through, Tim, some of the sort of questions that we've had from clients around the reverse charge?
Yeah, we were going to wait and see how many questions that we'd had through today, but we've had one or two questions in from people separately whilst we've been making contact with them as to finding out how the rules will apply to them.
Tim, just before you move on to that, the individual that had asked the other question has said that they supply and install the unit, so they do the installation too. So the question is, do we split the invoice to show the labour amount?
I think what we can do is we can come back to that one, because I suspect it may well be something that is covered by the disregard rules, and that's where they might come in. That's where they might come into effect. But that actually does kind of link in. That will link into a couple of questions that we've had in, and so one of the questions that we've had in from 2 or 3 of our clients has been, what should I state on an invoice to let my customer know that the reverse charge applies? So there isn't actually a prescribed format. All that the VAT regulations say is that invoices for services subject to the reverse charge must include the reference reverse charge somewhere. And examples of the wording include reverse charge, VAT Act 1994, Section 55A applies. Reverse charge, customer to pay the VAT to HMRC. But what we can do is, if anybody has concerns over how their invoices should be appearing, then we do have some templates of invoices available. And if anyone would like to see them, then do send us your details, and that's either your usual Seymour Taylor contact or myself. And just from that client that we've just been talking about, you mentioned Suzanne, who's been providing air conditioning services, that may be particularly relevant to them, because the example wordings we've got do show the different types of services on them.
That's great. So if they contact you, Tim, you'll be able to let them know that.
Yep.
I can't see any other questions in the Q&A that have come in, Tim, if there's anything else you want to cover.
No, so we did have another couple in. Don't know how relevant this is to people on the webinar. Another frequent question is CIS payment status. Does it matter whether I'm a supplier, I'm a subcontractor in the market? Does it matter whether I have gross payment status or whether I'm paid under deduction? And unfortunately, that doesn't make any difference about what your payment status. The reverse charge applies to anybody who provides CIS services, whether you have gross payment status or you're paid under deduction. The reverse charge will still apply. And another question that we've had in is about getting end user confirmations. So I'm a supplier. Should I get confirmation that a customer is an end user, or is it up to them to tell us? So the obligation belongs to the end user to confirm their status, and it is up to them to tell you. However, if you're not sure, then ask them, make contact with them. And I've already seen with some of our clients within the sector that they are being contacted. So I've seen people who are operating as subcontractors in the market being contacted by their customers for confirmation of their VAT and CIS status, just so that those customers will get a feel for what is expecting to happen with the invoices that they will be receiving going forward. And I think this probably presents quite a useful opportunity for people to make contact with both their customers and their subcontractors to understand what's going to be changing going forward.
Tim, we have had another question in. What about councils? So if we buy in electrical goods, put them into a control panel, then do the installation on site for a school, etc., our wholesaler will charge us VAT, but our client is not the end user in this case, or are they related?
So the question is the school an end user? I would think that they are an end user, but we can, so if you can take the details, then I think we can go back. If you can take that person's details, then I think we can go back, we'll check that and report back on that to confirm.
Okay, that's great, thank you.
This is sort of in the situation where it doesn't quite fit nicely with the ideas, the concepts of being an intermediary business and an end user, but it is generally the person who, or the purchaser, sort of consumes the goods or the services and isn't making an onward supply themselves, is another way of thinking about who is an end user.
Okay, thanks, Tim. There is no other questions showing in the Q&A. I've made a note of the individual that asked that question, so I'll put you in contact after.
Yep.
There's no other questions that have come up, so if you want to, if there's anything else you need to cover, or whether that's it for today.
No, that is everything, I think. Thank you very much, Suzanne. So thank you to everybody for joining us. As it says, the rules surrounding, as it says on the screen, please do contact us if you need any help or assistance in this area. The rules surrounding the charge, they are quite complex, and it is important that you get your head round what needs to change as soon as possible, as it does fundamentally affect the way you will be needing to report and account for VAT. And we are here to help you. In particular, if anybody has concerns as to whether their accounting software is properly doing processing documents, can it cope with the changes, then our outsourced accounting services team have a wide breadth of knowledge of using all of the leading software packages that are on the market, and they will be able to help you with those aspects of it. And again, please get in contact either with myself or with your normal Seymour Taylor contact. And if there are no more questions for today, I think that will conclude our presentation. So thank you all very much for joining us, and we will now be closing today's session. Thank you very much.